Joining me now is military analyst, retired Air Vice-marshal Sean Bell. And Sean, we're fast approaching this deadline for evacuation. How likely is it that we'll get all of those who want to get out?
It's difficult to know because but from a purely maths perspective, we're going to struggle to get 2,000 people out in time. But there is a question of how many want to. As you say, 536 British nationals by the end of last night. It's worth pointing out that the flights are going from Wadi Saidna, which is about 30 kilometres north of Khartoum. 6 flights so far. Each of those have a capacity of over 100 passengers. So if you do the maths, we're clearly not operating that air link at capacity at the moment. Over 2,000 British nationals are registered with a Foreign Office for their evacuation plan, and there is a steady flow of people arriving at the airport. Some of them are not British nationals, but we understand that they are filling the flights if they are not completely full with other nations' nationals. The issue here is how many of our British nationals actually want to fly out via the airhead, because many of them may have alternative ways of getting out, and how many that want to can actually not make the journey up there. And it's really hard to know whether this supply and demand is actually balanced at the moment.
And what about trying to extend the window? We managed to get it through having negotiations. I mean, is that a possibility?
Well, the current ceasefire between the Sudanese army and the RSF runs out at midnight. And there's a picture of Khartoum, just to put it into perspective, of from the 16th of April, which is before the ceasefire was agreed. It just shows how dangerous and difficult it is in the city outside these ceasefires. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has said that until he's got certain guarantees from the Sudanese government, but they expire at midnight. And the challenge is what happens after then. They are looking at diplomatic efforts to try and extend the deadline. I understand that the Sudanese army chief has agreed in principle to a 72-hour further extension. But, of course, it remains to be seen whether the RSF and other elements are content with that. But actually, regardless of that, the British military have also said that they would be able to continue to operate the airhead beyond the deadline. They have layered defence, force protection in place. The real issue there is whether or not they'd get the permissions from the Sudanese government and the army, and there's a political judgment to be made about whether that stays open.
And you've flown planes into these dangerous situations before. What are the risks? I mean, how do you balance up the risks of going into somewhere like this, trying to get people out safely, not losing your aircraft, not losing people? What are the kind of things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the judgments, obviously, is the pilot, but also the crew, and that's part of the challenge. But let's come on to that, because I think, first of all, there are other options to get people out. It's not just aircraft. So you pack an aircraft full of 120 people, that's a very juicy target if that comes down, and diplomatically, that will be a nightmare. The alternative routes are night driving. The trouble is fuel is in very short supply at the moment. There's all sorts of blockades on the road and the like, and even bus tickets are costing astronomical sums of money to try and get out to Egypt, for example. Reports of $14,000 just to hire a bus out. Port Sudan offers an alternative to get out. There's ships, HMS Lancaster's on its way there. That will provide the volume that gets people out, but it's still 500 miles of driving to get out there. So as you say, the airfield, it's much quicker, it's much closer, and the challenge there is that if it can be kept open. The risks, though, come to the risks, are the Sudanese government and the Sudanese army.
I mean, is there any evidence that they would target an aircraft intentionally, or is the risk more that that gets hit accidentally in the crossfire?
Well, it's a great question. If we were doing this at Khartoum airfield, there would be a risk of both. There'd be a risk of... but actually, because this airfield's 30 miles away, it's away from built-up areas. It would almost certainly have to be deliberately shot down. And therefore, is it the Sudanese government or the army? They're probably not a threat. Is the RSF a threat? It would be, but why would it prioritise that over trying to take the city, which it seems to be doing at the moment? Looters and those people who are trying to cause problems on the criminal front, they almost certainly wouldn't attack an airfield that's been protected by the military. But the RAF Transport Force, having been involved with that in my time in Afghanistan, they are incredibly well experienced with operating an operation environment. They are very used to balancing the threats. And one of the measures, for example, that they would take is they probably operate only at night, because the threats likely to be from small arms, from guns, and it's a lot more difficult to see a target at night. So one of the things they could do is only operate the air bridge at night. But whatever happens, if the government is to extend the opening hours of that air bridge, there's going to be a really interesting balance of risk and reward, and that's a political decision, not a military one.
And in terms of the planes themselves and capacity, my understanding is that they normally perhaps carry, we're looking at some of these big transporter planes, they might normally carry 100, 110 army personnel, but they can carry a lot more civilians, can't they? Because I guess they haven't got great big kit bags. I mean, although they'll probably have whatever belongings they're hoping to carry, they can squash a lot more people in if they want to.
They can. Part of it's how much baggage. So if you've now been forced to evacuate your home, you're probably not going to be carrying a little handbag. You're probably going to be carrying a whole load of suitcases with you, and every suitcase is a weight of a child, and therefore there's a balance to be struck there. But undoubtedly, the military aircraft, as you say, you can pack a lot more people in there if you need to, and you kind of overload the aircraft as well if you need to. At the moment, it doesn't appear that capacity is the issue.
OK, sure. Thanks very much.